You don't even enjoy it anymore. The scrolling, the eating, the hookup, the binge, it doesn't bring joy. It just quiets the silence. Just enough to forget yourself. Just enough to not feel the emptiness. But the moment it ends, you're right back where you were. Alone, numb, and quietly ashamed. Carl Jung would say, this isn't just a habit. It's not a craving. It's your unconscious trying to survive something it can't understand. This isn't about pleasure. It's about pain. Because no one gets addicted to pleasure unless pain made them. Let's go deeper. We live in a world where dopamine is easier to get than water. You don't need love. You just need a buzz, a ping, a like, a compliment, a hit of sugar, a hit of lust, a hit of maybe this time I'll feel something. Jung called this kind of behavior a symbolic substitute, because what you truly need, meaning, wholeness, connection, you don't know how to reach. So your psyche finds a stand-in, something easy, fast, shallow. And at first, it works. The drink makes you brave. The attention makes you feel worthy. The pleasure makes you feel alive. But soon, it becomes the cage. You start needing the hit. Not to feel good, but to feel less bad. You scroll late into the night, not because you're curious, but because silence makes your chest ache. You chase dopamine, not because you're full of energy, but because you're scared to stop and realize how empty you've become. This is what Jung meant when he said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Pleasure addiction isn't indulgence. It's avoidance. It's spiritual starvation dressed as stimulation. Because pleasure is not the problem. Unconscious pleasure is. Mindless, repetitive, desperate. When you can't stop, even when it's hurting you, even when it's eroding your relationships, your sleep, your self-respect, it's no longer about want. It's about need. That's when the shadow enters. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of you that you hide. The urges, the wounds, the truths that don't fit your ideal self. And when you repress it, it doesn't go away. It shows up in distorted form. You think you're craving pleasure, but you're actually starving for peace. You think you're chasing fun, but you're trying to kill time because you don't know what to do with yourself when you're alone. You weren't born to be numb, but pleasure addiction is a path to numbness, disguised as happiness. And here's the most dangerous part. It does work. For a moment. The hit quiets the anxiety. The attention softens the wound. The pleasure silences the scream inside you. But then it fades. And now your baseline is lower. Your need is stronger. And your self-worth is more tied to something external, something fragile. Jung believed that all compulsions are a call from the unconscious, a symptom of a split within the psyche. When you are addicted to pleasure, you are often split between two selves, the one that craves to feel good, and the one that remembers you used to feel whole. And this inner war is exhausting. You wake up tired, even if you rested. You feel guilty after doing the thing that was supposed to bring joy. You start hating the very things you used to love, because it's no longer joy. It's survival. But how did it start? Jung would say, it started the moment you stopped listening to yourself, the moment you ignored your pain and replaced it with performance. You told yourself, I just need to get through today. I'll stop tomorrow. This helps me feel normal. But the more you avoided the discomfort, the more you trained your mind to escape, not heal. And what you escape from always finds you again. Usually through addiction, usually through pleasure. So here's the truth. Pleasure is not evil, but using it to cover pain will always lead to emptiness. Your soul doesn't want pleasure. It wants presence. Your body doesn't want escape. It wants rest. And your mind doesn't want constant stimulation. It wants peace. But peace takes patience. Pleasure is instant. That's the trap. And you've lived in that trap long enough to call it comfort. You weren't always like this. There was a time when silence didn't scare you, when boredom wasn't painful, when your mind wasn't crawling for the next hit, next message, next bite, next scroll, next rush. So what happened? Carl Jung believed that addictions often begin in childhood, not because of the substance or behavior itself, but because of what was missing. You see, the human nervous system doesn't crave stimulation by default. It craves safety, stability, warmth, connection. But if you grew up in an environment where those were absent or conditional, your mind adapted. It found shortcuts. If comfort wasn't coming from people, maybe it could come from food. If love wasn't safe, maybe attention would do. If you weren't allowed to cry, maybe scrolling would help you forget why you wanted to. Pleasure became a replacement for presence. You didn't learn to feel your emotions. You learned to escape them. You survived by numbing. And because the numbing worked, even for a moment, you never learned how to heal. This is where the addiction begins, not in adulthood, but in the nervous system. Not in choice, but in adaptation. Jung wrote, "Every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol, morphine, or idealism, because it replaces confrontation with compensation. It teaches you to regulate pain without understanding its root." Let's say you grew up with emotional neglect. No one abused you. They just didn't see you, didn't ask how you were, didn't comfort you when you cried, didn't celebrate your mind, your feelings, your needs. So what did you do? You performed. You smiled. You kept it light. You made yourself small, manageable, low maintenance. And in that shrinking, you created a void, a place where your unspoken grief sat quietly, a place your ego couldn't look at, a place your nervous system tried to fill with pleasure because no one else was going to. Jung would call this a shadow wound, a place within the psyche where the truth hides because it's too painful to confront. And what hides always leaks. Maybe it leaked through binge eating. Maybe it leaked through relationships that burned hot but left you emptier. Maybe it leaked through workaholism, perfectionism, or sex. But it was never really about the thing. It was about the silence underneath. The silence of being emotionally unseen. Pleasure becomes addictive when it becomes the only place where you feel in control. The world tells you when to work, what to wear, how to act. But the moment you pick up your phone, the moment you take that bite, the moment you give in to the craving, you feel power. You feel agency. You feel something. Even if it's just for minutes. That's why it's so hard to stop. Because it's not the pleasure you're afraid of losing. It's the illusion of being okay. And society? It's built to exploit that. We live in a culture that profits from your emotional hunger. Everything is designed to keep you hooked, not healed. Jung warned us of this danger. He said that when people lose contact with their inner lives, they become fragmented. They become easy to manipulate. So what do you get? Endless ads that promise happiness through stuff. Algorithms that know when you're feeling lonely. Products that reward your brain before your heart even has time to speak. This isn't just capitalism. This is spiritual erosion. And the worst part? You start thinking it's your fault, that you're weak, that you're lazy, that you have no self-control. But here's what Jung would say. The addiction is not the enemy. It's a signal, a clue that something inside you needs to be seen, heard, and healed. You don't break free by punishing yourself. You break free by understanding yourself. What are you really craving? Connection, rest, love without conditions, a place to be soft without being punished. Because here's the truth. No one tells you. You don't want the chocolate. You want the comfort it represents. You don't want the scrolling. You want escape from your own mind. You don't want the high. You want a moment where you're not afraid. Jung believed that true healing comes from integration, facing the pain instead of burying it, meeting your shadow with awareness, not shame, replacing unconscious patterns with conscious choices. But you can't do that if you keep outrunning yourself. You have to stop. Sit in the silence. Feel the thing that scares you. The grief. The guilt. The loneliness. Because on the other side of that discomfort is you. The real you. The one that doesn't need to escape. The one that doesn't confuse stimulation with love. You don't need to become stronger. You need to become softer with yourself. Because what you call addiction might just be a wound that never got to speak. Pleasure is harmless. But what happens when it becomes your identity? What happens when your entire day revolves around avoiding discomfort? Not in big ways, but in small, quiet ways. You open your phone before your feet touch the ground. You eat not because you're hungry, but because you're restless. You reply to someone you don't even like, just so you won't feel forgotten. It's subtle, but it's everywhere. Carl Jung didn't live in the age of social media or instant dopamine, but he understood the pattern perfectly. He wrote that people become addicted when their outer world grows louder than their inner one, when the ego becomes a shell filled not with purpose, but with distractions. And distraction is the most profitable drug of all. Let's talk about dopamine. Dopamine is not pleasure itself. It's the anticipation of pleasure. It's the spark that says, something good is coming. That hit you get when the notification dings, when someone texts, "I miss you," when your video starts buffering and your brain gets ready to relax. But here's the catch. When you flood your brain with dopamine constantly, through sugar, porn, scrolling, attention, gaming, your baseline drops. You don't feel high anymore. You just feel normal. And without it, you crash. This is what modern scientists call dopamine dysregulation. But Carl Jung, he saw it as soul dysregulation, because your cravings are not just biological, they're symbolic. You're not just chasing pleasure. You're chasing a version of yourself that feels alive, wanted, in control, enough. But if you keep seeking that version externally, you'll never find it. Because the more you consume, the less you create. The more you escape, the less you become. And that's how you slowly lose yourself. Jung believed that every human has a deep longing for individuation, a process of becoming whole, not perfect, not socially acceptable, but true. And here's the problem. Pleasure addiction interrupts that process. It freezes your growth. It silences the inner voice that's trying to evolve. It replaces discomfort, the birthplace of transformation, with ease, which leads to decay. And worst of all, it makes you mistake sedation for satisfaction. Let's get real for a second. Have you ever turned off your screen after hours of scrolling and just felt hollow? Not sad, not angry, just empty. That's not boredom. That's spiritual burnout. Jung would say that your soul is tired of being ignored. You're feeding your brain, but starving your psyche. And here's where it gets dark. The systems around you know this. They study it. They profit from it. Modern media, advertising, even toxic relationships. They weaponize your dopamine circuitry. They make you associate love with anxiety, success with overstimulation, self-worth with feedback loops. Ever notice how the person who gives you mixed signals is the one you think about the most? How the app that's the most toxic is the one you keep checking just one more time. That's not random. That's manipulation, both internal and external. Because the manipulator doesn't need to hurt you directly. They just need to keep you craving. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Pleasure addiction is unconscious living, and it tricks you into believing it's your fault. You didn't try hard enough. You're lazy. You're weak, but what if that's not true? What if you're not broken? What if you're just disconnected from your body, your purpose, your soul? Because pleasure isn't evil. Dopamine isn't the enemy. Desire isn't shameful. What breaks you is the misuse of pleasure as a replacement for meaning. When you trade your soul for stimulation, you gain relief, but lose yourself. So what's the way out? Jung would say, awareness. Radical, brutal self-awareness. Not judgment, not self-hate, not detox. Integration. Looking at the shadow, the part of you that needs, craves, panics, and sitting with it. Asking, what am I avoiding? Who hurt me that I haven't forgiven? Why do I fear silence? What would I feel if I stopped running? These are not questions your phone will answer. Not your vices, not your reflexes. Only your inner world can hold them. And if you never go there, you'll stay stuck. Not because you're weak, but because the world gave you escape before it gave you healing. But healing is possible. It starts by doing nothing, by not reacting, by sitting in the craving and watching it rise, then fall. Because pleasure addiction isn't cured through force. It's healed through connection to your body, to your breath, to your real needs, and most importantly, to your pain. Because pain doesn't disappear when ignored. It grows. It adapts. It finds new ways to demand your attention, usually through addiction. So if you want to reclaim your life, you need to go where the noise has kept you from going. You've spent so long trying to escape pain. You forgot that pain is where all healing begins. Carl Jung never saw suffering as the enemy. He saw it as a messenger, a force that appears when the ego is too loud and the soul too silent. And in a world addicted to comfort, any form of suffering is treated like a malfunction. We sedate it. We scroll it away. We sugarcoat it, both literally and emotionally. And in doing so, we miss what it's trying to teach us. Because behind every pleasure addiction is a lesson your soul is desperate to whisper, but your habits won't let you hear. So how do you stop? How do you move from compulsive craving to conscious peace? Jung would say, you don't resist the addiction. You understand it. Because what you repress grows. What you avoid controls you. But what you integrate transforms. That's the power of what he called the transcendent function. It's the psychological bridge between your conscious mind and unconscious shadow. A space where inner conflict doesn't need to be destroyed, but held. Let's break it down. Right now, you're split. One part of you craves change. The other part still reaches for the hit, and you've been taught to fight one and feed the other. But Jung's work teaches something radical. You must listen to both. Because the part of you that's addicted is not evil. It's wounded. It's the child inside you that learned comfort is unsafe. That connection doesn't last. That numbness is better than rejection. So the addiction became a way to self-soothe, to feel alive, to not fall apart. You can't punish that part. You have to parent it. That's what Jung meant by inner integration. You bring both sides of yourself to the table. The one that wants peace, and the one that still clings to chaos. And you say, I'm listening now. I won't abandon you. We don't need to escape anymore. Because addiction isn't always about intensity. Sometimes it's about abandonment, a way of saying, if no one else is going to care for me, I'll find something that does. Even if it's sugar, even if it's the thrill of being desired, even if it's the false comfort of never being alone. So healing isn't about subtraction. It's about substitution. Replace reaction with reflection. Replace escape with expression. Replace the shallow high with something real. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And you cannot become that person while living for pleasure alone. You have to reconnect with yourself, the deepest part of your psyche, the part that doesn't chase dopamine, because it already feels whole." How? Start with rituals that ground you, not because they're trendy, but because they bring you back to your center. Silence in the morning instead of noise. A journal instead of a scroll. Real food instead of synthetic stimulation. A slow walk. A real talk. A breath held and released. These aren't lifestyle tips. They are acts of psychological rebellion. Because in a culture of chaos, stillness is resistance. You don't need to quit everything cold turkey. You don't need to punish yourself for slipping. You only need to wake up. Catch yourself reaching for the habit. And pause. That pause is power. That moment is presence. And presence is where the addiction begins to die. Jung believed every symptom is a message. And the message of pleasure addiction is simple. You've gone too long without love. Not romantic love. Not social love. But the love that comes from within. The kind of love that holds your cravings and says, you don't need to earn rest. You're allowed to be enough even when you're not performing. You're allowed to feel without numbing. Because here's the truth, Mawa. You were never meant to live in cycles of binge and guilt. You were never meant to feel good only when something external gives you permission. You were never meant to mistake stimulation for safety. You were born with wholeness, and all addiction does is bury it. But you can dig it out, slowly, patiently, lovingly. Not by becoming perfect, but by becoming aware. You are not the craving. You are not the habit. You are not the mistake. You are the one watching it all unfold. And that awareness, that's where transformation begins. So if this video reached you, if it whispered something you've been trying not to hear, you're not alone. You're just waking up. Now I'll leave you with this question. What's the one thing you keep doing that brings you the most comfort, but the least peace? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone. And if this helped you even a little, like this video, subscribe, and consider supporting Psychatic with a super thanks. We're not here to chase pleasure. We're here to find ourselves. See you in the next one.